You are standing in a cold stone courtyard before dawn, and your hands smell like tar and rope. Somewhere behind you, a crowd is already gathering. You did not choose this job. Your father had it before you, and his father before him. Today, you are not a person. You are a tool that walks. This is what it meant to be an executioner's assistant. In medieval and early modern Europe, not a monster, not a villain in a black hood, cackling in the shadows. A working man, trapped in one of the most feared and hated professions a person could hold. And the strangest part is this: the job itself was almost never voluntary. It was inherited, like a curse passed down through blood. Let's start with what you actually did every day. Because it was not what you think. Executions were rare. Most of your work was invisible. You cleaned wounds. You set broken bones. You treated syphilis, gout, and infections that university-trained physicians refused to touch. In many German towns, the executioner's household doubled as the local medical clinic for the poor, because doctors considered direct contact with disease beneath their dignity. Historian Joel Harrington, who spent years translating the surviving journal of Nuremberg executioner Frantz Schmidt, found that Schmidt treated over 15,000 patients across his 45-year career. 15,000. That's not an executioner. That's a full-time healer who occasionally, and reluctantly, killed people. Why? Because who else would touch you? In the strict social hierarchy of the time, executioners and their families were labeled unehrlich, meaning dishonorable. This wasn't a metaphor. It was a legal status. You could not join a guild. You could not marry outside a small circle of other dishonorable professions, like gravediggers, skinners, and gatekeepers. Your children inherited your dishonor at birth, whether they had ever held a sword or not. Barbers, who performed surgery in this era, would sometimes refuse to shave you. Innkeepers would refuse to serve you at the same table as other guests. You were essential and untouchable at the same time. So picture your actual morning. You are not preparing for a hanging today. Today, you are visiting a merchant's wife with an infected leg wound, because the physician turned her away, and your master's household is the only place in the city willing to treat her. You clean the wound with wine, because Schmidt's own records show this was standard practice, long before germ theory existed, and it worked more often than anyone at the time could explain. You apply a poultice. You are gentle. You are careful. And when she thanks you, she does not meet your eyes, because touching your hand, even briefly, is believed to bring bad luck. Now, let's talk about the day everyone imagines when they think of this job. An execution is not spontaneous. It is preceded by weeks, sometimes months, of your presence in the process. You are there for the interrogation. Court records from cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg show that judicial torture, when authorized, was carried out under strict written procedure, with a scribe present to record every statement, because confessions extracted illegally could be thrown out. This detail matters, because it destroys the myth that torture was chaotic cruelty. It was bureaucratic, cold, documented in ledgers. The same way you'd log a shipment of grain. You administer the procedure exactly as instructed. You do not improvise. Improvisation gets you fired, or worse, gets you dragged in front of the same council that employs you. On execution day itself, you rise before the sun. You inspect your equipment. If the method is beheading by sword, and in Frantz Schmidt's Nuremberg it usually was, you spend real time preparing the blade. Because a botched execution is not just cruelty, it's a professional catastrophe. Schmidt's journal documents 187 known executions and 345 corporal punishments across his career. Historians studying his surviving records found only a handful of confirmed botched executions, an extraordinarily low failure rate for the era. One Schmidt himself seemed quietly proud of. He took precision seriously, not because the law demanded elegance, but because a crowd that watches a clean, single-stroke execution goes home satisfied. A crowd that watches you fail 3 times goes home angry, and sometimes riots. Think about that for a second. Your professional reputation, your family's safety, and public order itself, all rested on how well you could do this one task. You walk the condemned to the scaffold. A priest offers final rites. The crowd is enormous, sometimes numbering in the thousands, because public executions functioned as civic theater, moral instruction, and entertainment all at once. Children are present. Vendors sell food nearby. This detail unsettles modern viewers, but it made total sense inside the worldview of the time. Justice was meant to be seen, understood, and remembered by everyone, not hidden away in a private room. You perform the act. It is fast. It is over in seconds. And then something strange happens. Members of the crowd rush forward. They are not fleeing. They are reaching for you, or rather, for what you're holding. In this period, the blood, bone fragments, and even the executioner's rope were widely believed to carry powerful medicinal and magical properties. Contemporary accounts describe people paying for a cloth dipped in a freshly executed criminal's blood, believing it could cure epilepsy. Bone fragments were ground into powder and sold as remedies. A piece of the hanging rope was thought to bring luck or cure headaches. So the same crowd that considers you untouchable in daily life will, minutes after an execution, pay good money for something that just passed through your hands. You're despised and desperately needed in the exact same breath. Historians still debate exactly how widespread this blood and bone medicine trade actually was across different regions, since evidence varies by city and century, but the pattern shows up repeatedly enough in court records, apothecary logs, and traveler accounts across German and English territories that it clearly wasn't a rare superstition. It was common enough to be its own small, dark marketplace. Now, here's the twist that changes everything. You thought you knew about this job. You could become wealthy. Frantz Schmidt died a free man, having successfully petitioned Emperor Rudolf II to have his family's dishonorable status legally erased, a request the emperor granted, something almost unheard of for someone in this profession. Schmidt spent his final years in Nuremberg, not as an executioner, but as a respected physician, treating patients openly, no longer shackled to the identity that had defined his entire life. His son went on to study medicine formally at university, something that would have been legally impossible under the family's old dishonorable status. Schmidt essentially engineered his own family's escape from a caste system. One careful medical case, one clean execution, one petition at a time. That's not the story we usually tell about executioners. We imagine men who enjoyed the work, who leaned into cruelty. The archaeological and documentary record tells a very different story. A man who kept meticulous, almost obsessive records of every single act he performed, arguably as a form of moral accounting, a way of proving to himself and to history that he had done his job with precision and restraint, not excess. So let's reconstruct the full arc of your life. In this role, you inherit the job as a teenager, likely apprenticed under your father or another executioner, because guild law bars you from almost every other trade. You spend the next several decades treating the sick, for free or for coin, performing dozens of executions with grim professionalism, enduring social isolation that would be unimaginable today, and quietly building a reputation for competence in a job where competence is the only thing standing between you and public humiliation. If you're skilled and careful like Schmidt, you might spend your final years finally free of the label that shaped your entire existence. If you're unlucky, a single botched execution could follow you and your family for generations. Here's the modern mirror, and it's closer to your own life than you might expect. We still stigmatize entire professions based on what they touch, rather than what they do. Sanitation workers, morticians, crime scene cleaners, people whose jobs quietly keep society functioning, whose labor almost everyone depends on, and whose social status almost everyone quietly looks down on anyway. We don't call it dishonorable status anymore. We don't pass laws about who they can marry, but the instinct, the discomfort, the subtle social distance, that instinct never fully disappeared. It just changed its language. And think about how we still treat true crime and public executions as entertainment, just relocated from the town square to a podcast feed or a streaming documentary. The crowd hasn't gone anywhere. It just watches from a different distance now. You began the story standing in a cold courtyard, smelling of tar and rope, believing you were nothing more than a tool that walks. But by the end of a career built on precision, restraint, and quiet medical skill, you might have been the closest thing your city had to both its most feared citizen and its most essential one. Not a monster, a man doing an impossible job as carefully as he possibly could. One patient, one careful stroke, one meticulous journal entry at a time.